Gerai. Labadiena visiems.
Good afternoon, everyone. I welcome you to the discussion, and I'm happy to see you in the discussion organized by the Seimas European Club and the Seimas of the Republic of Lithuania. The discussion will be on the future of the European Union and new proposals for Europeans. Well, as you understand already from the name of the discussion, we will be talking about the future of the European Union, about the decisions that we will have to be taken, the decisions that the citizens of the EU are looking forward to. Today we are going to have two members of the Parliament, Mr. Egidijus Vareikis, who is already here, and Mr. Andrius Kubilius has promised to come to the discussion. Unfortunately, he's a bit late, but hopefully he will come. And as always, we will have Professor Ramūnas Vilpišauskas, who will share his very interesting and comprehensive insights. Before we commence the discussion, and here Mr. Kubilius comes. So his participation in the discussion was not a myth, and Mr. Kubilius wants to defend the document that he has drafted. So I welcome him to the discussion. The after-crisis period in the EU is related not only to the search of new decisions, but also to the deeper insights into the situation. That is, the situation related to security and defense, situation related to international trade. We have to formulate new ideas because we hear certain ideas from the United States, and these ideas are more loud. We also have to deal with migration flows. Well, it seems that the EU has never had a short agenda, nor will it ever have. I'm very happy that this discussion is very important. The speech by Macron in Sorbonne is a very good illustration of what is happening in the EU. But we will have to look for new decisions. We will have to talk about the timeline for the decisions, and that is why we have come here. The discussions on the future of the EU involves very actively the European Parliament. For example, last Wednesday we had a debate in the Parliament that discussed the decisions adopted at the Council. I have a copy of a document. Most probably you'll find it interesting, and you will be able to take a copy with you. Qualified majority voting, or economic monetary union, and new decisions concerning the European Defence Union are the most relevant issues on the agenda at the EU. I will illustrate the resolution of the European Parliament concerning the economic policy in the Eurozone. Every country has a specific, country-specific countries. For example, the recommendation of 2016 concerning the economic restructurization. 2% of recommendations have been fully implemented, 43 with some progress, and the rest with very poor progress. So it seems that we adopt decisions and institutions work. However, after the conclusions are made, it seems that the implementation does not reach the target. I'd like to quote the words of President Tusk. He talked at the European Parliament, and these words are very important. He mentioned three very important things. The European Union is a territorial unit. What it means? It means that the matters related to external borders are important, and that they are not some secondary issues. Secondly, he said that it is a cultural union, and also that the European Union is a political union, which means that the European Union has certain values, it shares certain values, and it must preserve certain values, must comply with the values. He also said, if he personally, by June 2018, does not receive or does not hear about the steps, the following steps of the reform, he will name everyone who hindered the implementation of reforms. I don't know whether or what the purpose of this will be, whether it will be to bring shame to those who contributed to halting the reforms. But with these words, I would like to begin the discussion. And, well, if you do not mind, I will change the order of speakers in the discussion. So first we'll hear members of the parliament, then Mr. Vilpišauskas will provide his insights. Now I'd like to give the floor to Mr. Egidijus Vareikis, because unfortunately he will have to leave the discussion a bit earlier. Egidijus, do you believe in the European Union? Well, very much indeed, actually. I was very much willing to join the European Union. I thought that it was a necessary step. When we talked about the EU future in our working group, I said that whatever European Union we have, we need to be in that European Union for a very simple reason. And I will mention this reason at the very end of my presentation. Well, in fact, Mr. Auštrevičius, I wanted to begin with a different thing from the one that you have planned. As far as I know, less than 1% of European population read the 5 scenarios, the Juncker's plan that was recently provided. So it seems that Europeans perceive their future in a different way. I communicate a lot with the people who are members of the Schengen area, members of the European Union, members of the Eurozone, and they do not understand such words as cultural support, diversification, and some other European buzzwords. So I will be speaking about how those problems are perceived by the citizens in the European Union. I wrote an article, and this article will be published tomorrow in the lrs.lt portal. 3 funerals of European Union and 1 revival, because, well, we have 3 fairs. And we think that there might be some 3 challenges, and if we do not overcome those challenges, the European Union will collapse. So the first burial or the first funeral of the EU, or what I called, is the unfulfilled expectations of EU citizens. Well, in fact, it's not about democracy deficit, but it's about oversaturation with democracy. Today, we are living not in the period of democratic responsibility, but in the period of constant requests and expectations. Current life in the European Union is absolutely different from the one that was 20 years ago, or some 20, 30 years ago. Those who were students of political sciences some 20 years ago have to understand the reality in a different way, because it is those student books, those exercise books, are already too old for you to study. You have to look at some other sources of information. Well, we have some virtual reality. There are many interesting things going on in Lithuania. Well, we are true Europeans. You have noted that rightly. So everything is very natural. Well, by the way, Brexit is yet another request of the UK citizens. Those who voted for the UK to leave the European Union did not fully realize the true reason why they wanted to leave the European Union. Being politicians, we taught our citizens some hedonism. We promised them to create a heaven, a paradise here, but we have not fulfilled their expectations. There are no political ideologies. People do not need conservatives, liberals, or peasants, or the Greens Union. They want to live happy ever after and to live a life that is worth 5 stars. According to some statistics, as I am a part of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, we have political groups, political parties in this Parliamentary Assembly. Some 5 years ago, the EPP contained 200 members. There were some 5 unattached members. The EPP currently has 170, Socialists have 140, and the number of unattached members amounts to 60, which means that no one wants them, which demonstrates that members whom no one wants to have in their political group becomes the 3rd biggest political group in the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. Now, the coalitions are made of 3 to 4 political parties. Therefore, it is very difficult for people to vote for the political program that is offered in the pre-election period. So politicians are the ones to promise all the good things, but this is a problem. And there are some things that we should change in Europe. Well, I don't know whether the 5 Junckers scenarios will change anything in Europe. So I here talked about the first funeral of the EU. Now, the second funeral of the EU, or the scenario of the funeral of the EU, is could be called or could be referred to as the end of the holiday. Well, we talked about the post-communist communist period. Brzezinski already 10 years ago said that the Cold War is over, but Europe did not believe, because we in Europe thought that the period of Cold War was a rather nice moment in our lives. We still tend to think that the things will go right in Ukraine very soon. Well, we say that President Lukashenko is the last dictatorship in Europe, but nothing has changed for so many years. Russia is also no longer a post-communist country. Visegrad countries now promote some different ideas that they used some 20 years ago. The post-Cold War period was a rather pleasant one for us because we were very optimistic. We wanted to integrate into the Euro-Atlantic structures. It was the time that was very good for us, but the holiday is over now. We have to come back to work. We have to realize that the world is not at peace, that the world is divided. We now have some strategic partners, but I believe that neither China nor Russia are our strategic partners. Today, we are convinced that we made all the wrongdoings in Africa, that we killed Indians. Well, we know that before Europeans came to Africa, there was no slavery, but also there was no progress either. But we should not feel guilty before everyone. We should not feel guilty before India, before Africa, or some other countries. We can't change things. So we either ask ourselves to go to retirement and to get a retirement pension before we retire. So these are the problems that are perceived by the citizen. Mr. Kubilus and I argued a lot. Mr. Kubilus said that the Juncker's scenarios are long-term ones, but I think that the Juncker scenario does not take into account the changes in the geopolitical world, because we still have Africa and some other countries. We cannot do whatever we want. When a person comes to a doctor, he says that my ankle aches. The doctor does not propose the patient to choose from 5 methods of treatment. The patient is not at a disposal to choose the way of treatment. The same with Europe, and the same with those scenarios. I believe that we should replace those scenarios by something else. We should not be afraid to be ourselves and to say that the European civilization created the world. I wear a tie today, and a Japanese person might wear the same tie as me. So we should not be afraid of changes. We should not be afraid of European civilization. Well, we are all aware that our holiday is over, that we have to come back to work again. Well, sometimes people focus on minor things instead of focusing on greater ones. We should not express the requests, but create the music for the European song ourselves. We are like players of checkers. We respond to events in Africa, respond to events in Russia. But there was once a president, Ronald Reagan, who made Russia respond and react to the things that were happening in other countries. And to conclude, I'd like to say some things of what we have to do. The integration of the EU is very useful for Lithuania. The deeper the integration, the better it is for Lithuania, and I'm convinced in this. I'm very happy that we are as integrated, at least formally, as Belgium or the Netherlands. Well, so the only thing what we lack is the membership of the OECD, but I hope that we will soon achieve that. I believe that security issues are very important today. Today, it would be very difficult to occupy Lithuania without declaring war to other member states of the European Union. It is easy to declare the war on Ukraine or Moldova. So the more we are integrated, both in terms of security and other aspects, the better it is for us. We also have our own interests, and in the public sphere I am often asked whether I am a European or a Lithuanian, and they believe that there should be some difference between being a European and a Lithuanian. I see no difference in that. We will always want some changes to be happening. We will always want something to be made differently. But do we really need to make it differently? I am optimistic towards the future of the EU. I hope that even if any of these scenarios are implemented, it will be okay for us. I think that deeper integration in some different fields would be also good for us. This would not be well, but of course, after each funeral, there comes a phoenix, and we will survive. Mr. Vareikis, I have one question. As far as I understand, you understand a deeper integration in terms of economic and structural aspects. But what about political integration and about the values mentioned by Tusk? Do you see any opportunities to hear the same discussions in Lithuania as we hear in Poland? And when there is a potential problem between the capital and Brussels? Well, of course, there are problems related to values. I did not have the opportunity to mention everything because of the lack of time, but we have to speak about what kind of values do we have. The word value itself can I mean either good or bad things. We are different in our political views. So when people talk about liberal values, I don't think that they are important for me, but for example, someone else might not think that Christian values are important for them. So when Tusk says values, we have to raise the question, what kind of values does he have in mind? For some might seem that it is important to include in the preamble of the European Constitution that we are of Christian or Judaic roots, whereas some might think that this is improper. So we are also afraid of Islam coming to our countries, but, well, again, we have to agree what we mean by values. Unfortunately, the values of Mr. Tusk are not my values. We can simply agree on the areas and on certain values and to deliver on them. People like the words such as federalization or confederation, but they do not mean the same as they used to mean many years ago. It's not important how you name it. It's important how you implement everything. Do you have any questions for Mr. Vareikis? There is time only for one question only. So, are there any questions for Mr. Vareikis? Because he will have to leave the discussion. Well, I am from business, therefore I am very interested in economy. I read a very interesting book on economy yesterday. Wisdom is much more powerful than weapons. This is the sentence that I have read in the book. To my opinion, well, we don't have a clear understanding of what values are and what the European Union is, or as Charles de Gaulle said, from the Atlantic Ocean to the Ural Mountains. So I would like to hear your insights, how to formulate the vision of the European Union. Well, it all depends on what we agree to call or to name. When I am in Ukraine and people ask what European Union is, so they write Europe in this way. When in Lithuania we are asked the same question, we imagine Europe like this. So EU are capitalized letters. So do you see the difference? Some people write that Europe is Euro. According to George Friedman, Europe is one of the peninsulas of Asia. If you draw a line from St. Petersburg to Rostov on Don, Sarmatia Europeanas, Ptolemy wrote once. So we can have a different perception of what Europe is, or what European civilization is. If you are, some people say that if we were the 51st state of the US, we would be much happier. So let's agree on the concepts and on the definitions. When people say that when there is a European center next to Vilnius, I don't like this. When people say that Prague or Krakow cities are centers of Europe, then I'm much happier, more happy about that. As far as values are concerned, well, I didn't like what you said about liberals and about the liberal values. I am liberal in economy, but in a family policy, I'm not liberal at all. I have a question concerning values. I remember our arguments with Europeans concerning Palestine and how to treat relations between Israel and Palestine. There were quite a few arguments between the South and the North, but when it used to come to declarations, everyone started nodding their heads, and we would agree on certain things, because we have to turn ourselves to the Declaration of Human Rights. We have to read those articles, and we will see that those articles are not outdated at all. As far as the Human Rights Declaration is concerned and some other similar documents, so my observation is that some concepts are not old-fashioned at all. For example, if we looked at Magna Carta, so some concepts are still valid. For example, in the British Parliament, it is not allowed to wear armor. And one might smile after hearing that, but this is still included in their Magna Carta, in their documents, and some things will never change. I am an angry person myself when putting forward questions to various feminist organizations who fight for gender equality in the Netherlands and in other countries. But usually when referring to gender equality, people use different concepts. So we can argue about some things, but we can agree about certain things. When we want to agree, we agree. We have agreed as to what a partnership means. So we have very wise people. Let's leave them those questions. Thank you, Mr. Vareikis. I wish you a very pleasant trip. I hope that the fourth scenario will come true. Thank you for your participation. Now, I'd like to give the floor to Andrius Kubilius. Andrius Kubilius is a well-known friend of Ukraine, and this is very important to note. And Andrew, I have a question to you. How do you assess the conclusions of the Congress of the Chinese Communist People's Party, which has just ended? Well, just let's speak from the different dimension.
Thank you, Petras. I will try to respond. Thank you, first of all, for this discussion. Well, actually, a few weeks ago, we've started a discussion in the Committee on European Affairs, and this discussion has moved here. Well, I won't be very poetic as Egidius, but I will speak about similar things. In reality, how Lithuania should consider the EU future. And I'll repeat the idea of Egidius. First of all, we should mind our national interests, what other countries actually do. And our national interest is clear: to see the EU the strongest possible, the most integrated possible. And this interest comes from the sense of geopolitical security and also from instrumental understanding that EU is a motive for our growth and development. And in this sense, I think that other countries have similar views. Virgis Porteris was quite right about nationalism. All countries have nationalism, a feeling of nationalism. And Virgilius Porteris has noticed that, for example, when I look at Poland, I agree that they have a sense of nationalism. It's not because they want to see a weak Europe, but they want to see themselves to be strong, a big Poland. Lithuania doesn't wants to see Poland in major decision making together with Germany and France. Sikorski wants that. Kaczynski wants that. Actually, now Kaczynski stands at the position of powers now. But when I look at our vision and our position that we need a stronger Europe, I'm trying to look at the perspective, at the prospect of the EU and the future of the EU. I start asking myself what type of Europe we want and what are the biggest challenges that the EU will face in the future. And I have 4 points about our future EU and 4 points about future challenges. I will just name the challenges and explain them how I see them, and then I will speak about institutional things in wider presentations. Well, the list of challenges. First, global competition. Well, China might be a competitor for Europe. This is economical social challenge. It also requires some institutional changes. Another challenge is a non-democratic Russia. And this is a challenge that is actually continuing for several decades. Another challenge is North Africa and the entire Africa. Well, the document Harnessing Globalization shows a map which actually forces us to take seriously the continent of Africa, because in the future it is going to grow very rapidly. We have to take this into consideration. And the main challenge, which is mostly related to the EU itself, is the challenge of solidarity. Speaking about the EU, I will be very rapid here. Well, the first challenges of future development of the EU. Are we afraid of this development or not? Because sometimes we are lost in our momentary fears and we do not take into consideration the entire view. So the long-term consolidation of the EU is an important factor. I believe that the EU in the future has the greatest potential to maintain its development. I think that this is a scenario of natural consolidation from Rome Treaty to the Lisbon Treaty. We have the road of natural consolidation. The European Union has been strengthened. I will keep quoting Mr. Vilpišauskas. Jean Monnet, who said Europe will be created during crisis and will be actually built during crisis. This was the beginning that he saw the European Union. I agree with him 100%. The EU actually developed from one crisis to another, and during each crisis it found a more consolidated solution of one another problem. The last crisis brought to the banking union. The migration crisis has brought us to better protection of borders, stricter protection borders and asylum system. I believe that the EU has a great potential to develop in the same way. This means that in 60 years, the EU will be even more consolidated. And we should not be afraid of that, I believe. This is a natural consolidation. We will have ups and downs. We will have discussions and disputes, but we should not be afraid of consolidation. We should try to be in the core of this consolidation in terms of geopolitical security. Now, secondly, horizontal development of EU powers. Do we need to be afraid? Well, subsidiarity is something sacred, and we often wave the flag of subsidiarity when we look at the EU, but when waving that, we very often hide our inability to do something. If we look at Lithuania and its developments in 27 years, our greatest progress is in the areas where the European Union policy has forced us to progress, be it fiscal discipline, common economy, or defense policy, while the least progress can be seen in social issues, in health, and in education, where the EU has no major powers. Well, we should not reject subsidiarity. But we should not be afraid of natural development in this area. I have in mind decent development and progress. We should not be afraid of that, because our experience shows that the EU policies in the longer term, in the areas where these policies are effective, is very useful to Lithuania. Another thing that I have to point out is the issue of EU resources. during the natural consolidation of the European Union and the horizontal expansion of powers, which we really agree to. From crisis to crisis, the European Union needs to get stronger and to consolidate itself. We should bear in mind the fact that the resources the EU possesses is 1% of the GDP and hasn't grown recently, and rather it has dropped. And I believe that the EU faces a problem here. I have recently participated in a discussion on the future of the EU, and one German politician said that the EU has to move from legislative union to executive union, and actually resources are needed for that. And when there is a lack of resources, we may see the gap between the expectations of European citizens, the realization of politics, and also the resources, which are very limited. I think we should be more brave here when saying that the budget of the EU should be larger. I know that this sounds to be a curse word, and I've been excluded from one of the forums for my words, but I think that this is something that should be spoken out more loud, but it has been noted during the reflection papers, and I think that they should be pointed out. And actually the EU reminds me the development of the USA in 1856, when 1.5% of the GDP was reached in the budget. Later on, wars and other crises increased the budget to from 30 to 35%. Well, certainly, I don't mean that we have to increase the budget so drastically, but we should not be afraid of this movement. And in this case, Lithuania should speak out more loudly. And we should not be afraid of actually contributing to this increase. Well, briefly, one more instrumental aspect which is important for me. I see some ideas and reflection papers as well. Well, this is a short-term aspect. It is related to the convergence of EU member states. I believe that Lithuania and other Baltic states and other new member states will face the fact that we will get into the middle income trap, and we will not see this rapid growth of welfare. Well, actually, the growth we've noticed during the first 15 years in the European Union. Actually, being poor, we've joined the rich club, and we have been developing very rapidly. And actually, this rapid development will be slowed down. And in this case, the European Union could be more effective in helping us to implement the reforms which would enable us to return to faster convergence or to faster economic growth. The European semester is a good instrument here. We had a chance to discuss on that in the Committee on European Affairs, but actually Brussels does not know how to force the countries to implement the proposals of the semester. And actually our authorities tend to look for ways out of the necessity of using the instrument of European semester. I see that the European Commission wants to link the structural funds, structural assistance with European semester. And I think that we should agree to that. Well, this was the brief discussion on the basic aspects of the future of the European Union. We should not be afraid of things that we shouldn't be afraid of. We should, well, concerning the European Union and its bigger challenges, competitiveness, very briefly, this is a problem. Well, it's not been discussed in the papers, but some 7 or 10 years ago, I've heard Merkel say that the EU has about 7% of global population. It produces 20% of global GDP. I believe that now it has dropped to 18%, and the EU is funding 50% of the global social expenditure, which means that the European Union and the European model, if we can call it, is very socially oriented. And here we might ask ourselves whether it will be able to withstand the competition where social expenses are much lower. So social burden on the European economy might lead to more serious consequences, something that we should avoid. The European Union can be forced to choose whether it should move to a more Anglo-Saxon model where the social guarantees are fewer, or the EU should follow the example of the Scandinavian countries where there are large social expenses, but great competitiveness can also be sustained. Scandinavian countries are well developed and well structured, where they can ensure best education, social guarantees, and economic competitiveness. And well, in the long-term perspective, Lithuania, as a neighboring country to Scandinavian countries, we should not be afraid of following the Scandinavian path. Well, liberals would oppose to that, which would mean a great redistribution, but this could be one of the development roads for us. And 2 more challenges in terms of the 21st century: Africa, refugees, and other things that cannot be discussed due to the lack of time. I think that we should not bear in mind that today's situation, we've managed to manage the migration crisis. I'm not convinced that these are the measures that can really be used to manage the wave of migration from Africa, bearing in mind the population growth. I'm not sure whether the European Union is ready for this challenge. And the final challenge, which is democratic Russia. We might talk about this time on end. Now we are thinking more about Northern Africa, refugees and other matters, but I believe that Russia is not considered to be an important aspect in terms of the future of the EU. Vladimir Putin might win overcome Ksenia Sobchak and would become the president for the next term of office. He might remain in his office until he reaches 85 years of age. This is not a promising factor, and the only instrument that the EU could handle in trying to maintain a clearer policy towards Russia is more effective attempts to develop a ring of friendly countries around Russia. I have in mind Ukraine. We are working on the European plan on Ukraine. I thank the European Parliament. The resolutions are correct, but we need more European actually consideration of the fact. And the final thing I would like to pinpoint: in Lithuania, we have to clearly voice that European solidarity are not words only. This is a practical thing, which is a basic thing, which should be considered as very important for us, because we are great users of European solidarity, consumers of solidarity, and we should be ready for spreading this European solidarity and to donate the solidarity. And I'm a little bit afraid that Central and Eastern European countries do not consider solidarity as the basic value. And I wish that Lithuania should speak about that and say that actually we support solidarity. Well, I didn't speak about China. Well, thank you. Your insights are very interesting. Thank you very much. What about our region? I understand that the Committee on European Affairs is drafting a very important document. But do we coordinate our positions with our neighbors to have a wider position, a wider view? Or this will be purely a Lithuanian document, or will we attempt to create a regional document? Well, first of all, I believe that it is important for us in Lithuania to find ways to voice clearly those basic and fundamental aspects. Well, actually, you are further from Lithuania. Therefore, it is difficult for us to find a common ground. We need to give a clearer position. Well, in terms of the region, I really believe that the Nordic-Baltic region can and should have a more common view. But actually, we're not able to clearly formulate political views or political proposals. Actually, the Baltic Assembly is about to start, and its weight unfortunately have dropped, and it is less able to clearly formulate the clear ideas on the European Union. Well, unfortunately, the bureaucracy is an obstacle to that. I might say here that we will try and attempt to look at common positions here in the region, but I see that Polish national position is based on Polish ambition to be accepted, as the European level decision makers. Well, despite the fact that we are leaders in the region of some aspects and even beyond, we don't have ambitions similar to Polish ones. Well, we are not taking any resolutions in the European Parliament. Poland is afraid of having this resolution against it in the European Parliament. I think that this should be taken into account. Well, actually, this will bring us to the context of some bilateral relations. Well, thank you very much, Andrius. Ramūnas. Well, could you expand on the ideas of politicians or beyond politicians?
Good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation to this interesting discussion. This is a very good continuation and expansion of the format, because some of the things have been deliberated in the Rutko working group, and I have contributed to the work of this group with my insights. Taken into consideration time constraints, I will propose several insights from various international relations studies, and I will talk about the national interests of Lithuania, what the European Commission has proposed, and the reflection papers of the European Commission, and the scenarios are only made to provoke discussion as I see them. Maybe they have certain other intentions to show some most extreme scenarios, so that less extreme scenarios are not that scary for the public. Well, we might think of some other reasons for providing us with those reflection papers, but this discussion is also very good. You have asked me what mistakes politicians make. I believe that politicians make mistakes when they restrict their approach with one direction only. They either choose that any decision taken by the European Union will be good for us, or they think that any decision taken at the EU level will always bring something negative for us. And this is what I often see in Lithuania. I believe that first and foremost, we should start by saying that member states of the EU are the key actors that are here to decide what the EU has to do to change, how it should change. Nothing is happening in the EU without the knowledge of the EU member states. So anyone, society, politicians, anyone can contribute, because this ensures the democratic processes. Of course, there are certain restrictions, but well, we have a voice in the EU. There are studies that convincingly show that even the voice of small countries can be heard if their representatives act in a targeted and argumented way. The arguments of the EU institutions are accepted but if our politicians who go to Brussels say some things, whereas when they come back do other things, this is not good. This does not happen in Lithuania only. I think that the Brexit is the perfect example to that. When negotiating in Brussels, the UK representatives say different things from the ones that they say when they go to the United Kingdom. I am convinced that we are responsible for their decisions, but we also have to understand what our interest is. We also have to understand what the EU is. We sometimes mystify the EU. We either see what we want or what we're afraid of. Mr. Vareikis has already said that he was sorry that the EU has focused too much of its attention to the form of cucumbers or bananas. Well, trade, investment, movement of people, single market, are the things that are important. When you talked about the Tusk and the values that he mentioned about the political union, you have not mentioned one very important thing. The European Union is first and foremost an economic union. Well, I guess this is a reprimand to President Tusk rather than Mr. Ostrevicius. Well, we are all aiming at peaceful coexistence of all member states. But well, there are discussions on defense, on the common defense budget, on security policy, cultural, value-based things. Well, all these things are important, but this constitutes only a very small part of what the EU is about, because majority of the activities of the European Union is boring. It has to do with the standards of quality of goods, with the shape of cucumbers and bananas, but this should not become a hinder for a proper functioning of the European Union, whether we like it or not. We have to eliminate those barriers for mutual exchange. We cooperate with each other, we trade with each other because we are convinced that this is beneficial for us, and this corresponds with the national interest of every country. Looking at the nature of the European Union, we have to formulate the interests of member states. I'd say that national interests of Lithuania should be formulated on the basis of shared insights. For example, fiscal federalism is the theory that has been developed, and it is about the level of federalization, which is supranational, municipal levels, when it is optimal, when it is effective to certain functions, to other borders, and to function them. Many studies have been conducted. They are all grounded on the federalism concept. And according to this vision, the EU budget is a bad one because it does not match the recommendations. It does not comply with the recommendations. It has to be directed towards creating added value, according to the fiscal federalism. If such projects are financed from the EU funds, for example, research and other. And if we talked about the common agricultural policy, taking into consideration the level of development of member states, so well, these such payments are not good for those countries which have a lower level of development. The example of Greece is also has also given us a very valuable but painful lesson. This was the country of a different structure, different politics, and the country joined the Eurozone, and the crisis has shown very clearly the repercussions on the European Union. Well, what I wanted to say is that we have common principles and that we should not forget those common principles when we discuss the proposals that have been proposed by the EU institutions. From the international relations perspective, I think that such countries as Lithuania, small countries, open economies, especially in such a geopolitical environment as Lithuania is, a regional international cooperation based on rules is of crucial importance. If not for the rules, if not for the standards of the World Trade Organization, if not for the rules and regulations of the European Union, then our relations with France or Germany would be absolutely difficult. The same would apply to our relations with Russia. Therefore, the European Union is a set of highly institutionalized rules that help the EU member states to address the external threats, both when dealing with each other and both when dealing with third countries, including Russia. In Lithuania, we've seen on many occasions when Russia starts a case on regarding Gazprom, when the EU initiates the case against Gazprom, it sounds much more powerful than if, for example, Lithuania alone initiated the case against Gazprom. I believe that the discussions of the academic community can provide us with very many insights, and I don't think that the discussions among politicians could provide with such deep insights. I believe that there should be strategic discussions. While talking about Lithuania in particular, not only principles are important, we have to take into consideration the specificity of Lithuania. It is a small economy, small open economy. Its development depends on what is happening in its neighboring countries, in the countries that are its key trade partners in the European Union in general. Lithuania borders with Belarus and Russia, the specificity of the regimes of which poses as many challenges. Lithuania is not integrated in the continental European electricity networks. In Lithuania, we have very many people living in poverty. So all these things are very important that should be borne in mind when formulating Lithuanian position. Now, when talking now very specifically about Lithuania's position and the words expressed by Macron and the positions by the European Commission, well, I don't know whether these proposals are new. Although the topic is called the new proposals for European, I'd like to say that the idea of Europe was introduced in 1960s. Therefore, I should remind you that many things that are now proposed by the European Commission are not new at all. They have been simply adapted to the economy and to the environment today. The first serious discussion about the monetary union began somewhere in the 70s or 80s. I am convinced that the European Union will deal with all the crises. But the thing is that the social and economic gaps in the European Union are much more significant than they used to be previously. Well, in 2004-2006, the deliberation of the Services Directive was also the directive that received a lot of attention. There were a lot of demonstrations on the streets. Everyone remembers the image of the Polish plumber in European capitals. So the higher the difference in salaries, the greater the benefit those poorer countries receive from the convergence of salaries. But of course, we understand that there are a lot of protest campaigns in other member states. Therefore, we have to see the problems, and that is why this crisis in Europe is different from the ones that used to be in the past. accession of the Middle East countries into the European Union was a very significant step that increased the inequality among the member states. We also have to face the challenges related to the military conflicts. The neighborship of Russia is also another thing that poses problems to the European Union. When talking about the interests of Lithuania, social policy matters have to come into play. Our productivity is still lacking behind from the one of the Nordic countries, from Denmark, from the Netherlands. Therefore, when we talk about the Workers' Directive, we have to take into consideration how this directive will affect our countries. It is very important for Lithuania to continue with this convergence trend. Because we no longer can enjoy this positive effect of being in a single market. Lithuania's interest well, I hope that Donald Trump will remember the treaty free trade agreement between the European Union and America, and hope that this will be concluded. I hope that the EU will continue its negotiations with Japan, Australia, and other democratic countries. But, well, we have to, again, cooperate with Eastern Partnership countries, but to my belief, not everything that is proposed by the European Union to Eastern Partnership countries are not, is not good. I believe that Lithuania's interest is not to face with so many obstacles. I hope that the things that are happening in NATO will not diminish the role of the European Union. When talking about the reform of the budget, as I have mentioned, Lithuania believes it is important to concentrate onto those areas that would bring added value. That is strengthening of border infrastructures, financing of border projects, development of scientific projects, and of course we have to address the question such as the decommissioning of the Ignalina nuclear power plant and funding for the decommissioning of the nuclear power plant. As far as the reform of the monetary union, both Macron and the European Commission have made a few proposals. Here it is very important to assess how those changes might affect the purchasing power of Lithuanian population. We also have to assess the inflation. We have to assess the interests of our taxpayers. And what I like in those discussions is the interests of the taxpayers. I believe that Lithuania, as a small country, it is important to have certain safeguards related to adoption of decisions in institutions, because in some cases it is very important to ensure that veto right is preserved, especially in the area of taxes. I believe that those principles are very important for Lithuania and must be maintained. So I'll finish at that, and I will be happy to answer any questions. Thank you, Mr. Vilpišauskas. I have a question. You have talked about taxes and some other things, and it comes as no surprise that other High Representative Mogherini is very important because it is proposed that the High Representative for Foreign Policy should be the head of all the foreign ministers. How would you assess those proposals? Well, I don't even ask about the defense minister for the EU. Well, this is one of the proposals that is often deliberated, but they rarely receive a very specific substance or content. I don't know what this new Eurozone finance minister might do, what differently he might do from the things that the Eurozone members do. Head of the Eurogroup.
Komisijos pirmininko Junckerio siūlymas buvo vienoks.
Head of the Eurogroup and so on. But none of them said what problems the minister would address and what voting rules would be. Would that be the majority voting principle? And also, it has not been answered about the sources of finances. No one has asked whether they will introduce a kind of a financial transaction tax, so whether these things will be funded from the EU fund, whether would they invent some other financial instrument or create something new on the stability mechanism principle. So it seems that the discussions on establishing a new institution might bring population of the EU be more interested in matters of the EU. But to my opinion, majority of people find it difficult to understand how the EU functions. There are many things related to the institutional engineering, but what it means to a specific person in a specific country remains unclear. Discussions about new ministers, about new institutions, about new forms of operation, new committees are not the most important things. Well, you have expressed very dangerous thoughts, Mr. Vilpišauskas. From people working in the Council, I've heard talking about the initiative on the finance minister for Eurozone. French believe that they should have the minister that would spend more, whereas the Germans think that the minister should spend less. So this is a problem. German colleagues, not only from the academic community, but diplomats as well, from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, they say that they are not, it is not clear for them what the French have proposed. And not many can understand what the new finance minister can do. Well, this shows a very good position of France and this way of working of French, because they might establish some new institution, provide with a certain mandate. I will provoke you further on. Lithuanian President Dalia Grybauskaitė says that we are happy with the German approach. I don't know how have you decoded this statement by the president. Is this position based on the insights and the documents? Won't it happen that one institution, that is the president, says one thing, whereas your institute, the Institute of International Relations and Political Science, will say another? Well, I don't have any fears related to the leadership of Germany in the European Union. Well, Polish do have such fears, but I understand them because they want some recognition in the European Union. Natural leadership demands some natural development of processes. Well, the president might have said that we like the approach of Germany, but I also like the leadership of Germany. I believe that Germany is a smart country, and I hope that it will take into account our considerations, having in mind the fact that German troops are on the Lithuanian soil. Well, I agree that Germany's leadership is the most important factor today. It is on this factor that the development of the EU in the future will depend. I hope that this will translate into certain decisions with regard to the future of the EU, and this duet of France and Germany will have to work together. Macron has made very cautious suggestions about the finances of the European Union, but he made this deliberately because he does not know what kind of position Germany will have. As far as German military presence here in Lithuania, we believe that Germany is committed to Lithuania. But to my opinion, in some cases, Lithuania's position is a little bit different than the one of Germany. For example, as far as the Posted Workers Directive is concerned, we have a different approach. We have different interests, because I know that our carriers, freight carriers, face with quite a few problems in the EU. Now I open the floor for the discussion, and I give the floor to Mr. Gelūnas. I have a very brief question related to the separatism of European regions. Well, we have the the Flanders region. Is that a threat to the European Union or not? I believe that this is the outcome of natural processes in the European Union, and I perceive them positively. With the consolidation of the European Union, what does that mean? To simplify, the more powers from capitals are taken to Brussels, and the sovereignty reduces. Brussels receives more powers, whereas national member states receive less powers. Therefore, regions that have more historical sentiments start feeling that the power of the capital decreased, but Brussels, as its umbrella, increased its powers. Then such regions are tempted to disregard the opinion of the capital and to address for help to Brussels. So, well, I don't have a recipe here. I believe that we have to think this question very seriously, and what kind of common policy we should propose to those regions so that they could feel rather recognized, rather safe, but how to ensure that they will not make any earthquakes in the European Union. So once again, I believe that this is the natural outcome of what has been happening in the European Union. And to my opinion, this consolidation does not go in contract to my position.
Ramūnas. Well, I'm not an optimist. Well, I might seem fatalic, but that might sound like fatal optimism. Well, regional movements can be strengthened due to the existence of the EU, but in many ways there are some opposite tendencies. We see the reaction of the EU institutions. We see different reactions among the EU institutions. These are very cautious but very clear. Well, actually, we'll say that, well, Catalan region is the matter of Spain. And other member states in the European Union are very much preoccupied about the developments. During the referendum in Scotland, Spain was preoccupied already. So the existence inside the European Union actually strengthens certain regions and makes them more courageous and gives them more power to voice more requirements to their capitals. But it isn't clear, and I don't think that the present attempt of Catalan to become independent will be finally achieved. I believe that more autonomy will be achieved together with the amendment of the constitution. The politicians of Catalan have their own reasons, political reasons to do that. Therefore, I believe that this euphoric movement for independence is very beautiful, with some retrospects to the Baltic Way, but there is a difference between the Baltic states and the current situation in Spain. Now we are facing a difficult current situation. Well, it is painful to both sides. It has brought many economic problems to Spain and Catalan region. Well, first of all, I should thank Petras for an interesting discussion. We should have more discussions on that. We communicate with regional businessmen, and they are lost and they misunderstand of the situation. They want more clarity in their relations with other countries. But my question goes to Andrius. He said that he has many friends in Ukraine. Well, I'm happy for that. But Andrius, who is a better friend, Mikhail or Petro? Now, on a more serious tone. Well, I spoke about the wisdom and necessity of wisdom in politics. We've made many mistakes, and we need the weapons rather than wisdom in order to resolve the current situation. And a certain position worries me a lot in terms of Putin. We estimate that he will be president of the Russian Federation until he reaches the age of 84 years. If Tusk next year will name the culprits, and who will be culprits for all those policies? Do we have a vision if we have Putin in power until he reaches 84? Well, actually, German businessmen, well, I speak as a businessman, German businessmen can resolve their problems, whereas we will remain in this rural type of policy, if I might say so. Is my question clear? Well, it is clear. I will try to explain. Well, be careful. Well, many things might happen. We actually are a borderline country, and this is our geographical fate and destiny, and our geopolitical fate. We are most interested in having good relations with Russia, because history shows that when we have bad relations, actually we suffer. Well, actually, we managed to fight Dmitry in 1600. But good relations depend on the situation in Russia. The behavior of authorities in Russia actually pose some threats, and we should be naive if we ignore this. This would be costly to our business and our security. Well, actually, we're interested in helping Russia to transform and to become a more normal European state. But the only instrument that we have in our hands is a principal position, and to help countries around Russia, like Ukraine, to become successful countries and be a good example for Russia. I don't know any other instruments for that. And we are actually a borderline country. France or Germany might have a different approach. Well, it does not make our life easier if we are not cautious and think that Russian policy or its aggressive behavior in Ukraine should not be a worry for us. Well, in terms of Ukraine, I don't know about our mistakes. It is difficult for me to remember them. Ukraine actually was attacked with Russia's aggression. I think this is Russia's mistake. Well, it made Ukraine a pro-Western nation. And the more pro-Western feelings we have in the region, the more chances Ukraine has to become pro-Western countries, and the more powers we have in our hands to help Russia. Therefore, it's not Petro or Misha who is our friend, but actually Ukraine is our friend. Thank you, Andrus. Well, actually, it's not in vain that you are a member of parliament. Well, I just will repeat myself. We have to put all our efforts to help Ukraine, and therefore we need a Marshall Plan for this. I'm convinced that, unfortunately, social processes without Western support in post-revolutionary countries, and especially at the border of Russia, is best reflected by the Dodonization. We found a new term, actually. Well, if we leave it at that, Putin will return to these territories, and he will use democratic elections and natural disillusionment of people that the economic situation is not improving. And this actually will aggravate our situation. Thank you, Andrus. One more question. Two questions. Two questions are sufficient to finish our insights. Could you please introduce yourself? Well, my question is very simple. Could you please introduce yourself? I'm Václavas. Well, this is a simple question. We're all discussing Russia and its threat. Well, it is obvious, but we are forgetting one simple fact which actually exists in our politics. We have two members of parliament who are evidently corrupt and have interfered with their political career. It is evident when a member of the seimas Kurjus, who has received a credit from Gazprom, and all people understand, those people who have critical thinking understand that Gazprom has a certain interest. This might be considered as a credit from Putin directly. And another representative who used to sell Lithuania to Rosatom. So how can we speak about European integration and other aspects when inside we have some negative aspects? Well, we have the constitution that clearly defines the ways for the seimas when there are some beliefs when there is a misuse of power, and there are some ways to decide on that. These are parliamentary investigations, and actually we are at that stage. But in this term, I'd like to point out that we should not question the seimas only, but also we should not question the parliament only, but also the electorate and the society, because politicians have their electorate. And your question, could you please be brief? Good afternoon. Thank you very much for the discussion. I would like to return to the Baltic region and to Scandinavian region, to the Nordic region. I would like to ask your opinion. What do you think about the Baltic and Nordic cooperation? There are a lot of platforms, Nordic Baltic 8, Nordic Baltic 6, that we are cooperating. But is this cooperation really fruitful? And does it have some future perspectives, or is this merely a declaration? And what do we have to offer for the Nordic countries? How are we seen by the Nordic countries? Are they interested, the Nordic countries, in developing cooperation with Lithuania? By Nordic countries, I mean the EU member states. Well, actually we have cooperation, and it is quite considerable. It is quite intensive. I should say that sometimes I lack the spirit we had before joining the European Union, because the Nordic countries actually wanted and had a task to help the Baltic states to become NATO and EU members. And now we have attained our targets, and the Nordic countries believe that they have actually achieved their tasks. And we have less emotions in our cooperation, and this is actually our fault as well. It is our task to understand how we want to position ourselves. I have in mind the Baltic states. Estonians that we are attempting to follow, or sometimes we fail, often say that they are a Nordic country, whereas we often say that we are in Lithuania, are leaders in the region, the leaders in the region. Well, actually, it is not clear about the region, but we want to refer to ourselves as leaders. I'm convinced that we should underline the Nordic-Baltic region and its specificity, and to make use of that, because the Nordic-Baltic region, thanks to the Nordics itself, is considered to be a highly competitive, high-tech region. Well, as the Prime Minister, I had an opportunity to meet with a large corporation, and in Silicon Valley they would hardly understand what Lithuania is. Well, actually, we tried to draw the map and say that Lithuania is between Russia and Poland, which means more than Russia but less than Poland. And when we explain to them that we are part of the Nordic-Baltic region, an innovative region, they seem to understand it better. Therefore, our aim is to educate ourselves on this region, to understand it better, and to develop in the region. I think that we fail to appreciate the intensivity of this cooperation. Well, the disputes on synchronization and on Astrovets nuclear power plant, where Latvia has a different position to that Lithuania holds. But we should have in mind the number of Nordic countries and companies investing into Lithuania. Power connections is a very important project, and it has been implemented between Lithuania, Sweden, Estonia and Finland in the area of security, where Sweden and Finland are not members of NATO, but very many things are taken for granted by us, and now we find ourselves in this situation. We've attained the goals, and therefore it has to change, and we need to consider ourselves equal, though we have some differences in economic development. Well, actually, we notice the sharing of best practices from Nordic to Baltic countries. But when we speak about openness to the global economy, Nordic countries are much more liberal and open. Well, with the exception of Estonia. The European Union actually made a negative influence on Estonia in terms of customs. When we speak about Nordic politicians, Mr. Jensen and Carl Bildt, Mr. Hannibalsson, you might get the impression that their political investment into the Baltic states is actually something that has given positive results, which is considered to be the best political result. This is an effective investment. Therefore, I believe that paternalism from the past has given certain results. We might be proud of that. They might be proud of that, because Nordic investment have given results, positive results, and we have a great potential of our partnership in terms of trust in the European Parliament, to have a huge trust. We don't need long and introductory speeches to understand each other. We have differences, but we have a great potential. I believe that I should thank our participants. Thank you very much for finding time to express your views. I thank the staff of this office with Donatas and interpreters. Don't forget the copies on my table. So see you next time. Goodbye. Thank you.
I see good